You know, I feel afraid almost every day, but I go forward anyway. So
Yes.
it's the existence of fear in and of itself that isn't the problem, but it's how we relate to it. And I wonder if you can talk more about that and what you've learned about relating to fear and how you mentor people with that.
Well, here's the really fascinating thing. So I have been the most insecure, fearful person ever my whole life, right? Terrified of making a mistake. I was the perfectionist of all perfectionists. Like if I got a 99, it wasn't good enough. However, the really fascinating thing is when I believe knowledge for me has been the unlock. So when I learn about a domain to such an extent that I know it better than anyone else, the fear disappears. The fear turns into confidence. So, for example, with wooden toys, right? I researched it to such an extent. I could tell you every country and what they made and the history. And I became so wise in it that my intuition, which by the way is not some woo woo thing, intuition is actually the result of a deep immersion in a domain for so long and to such an extent that that data becomes, woven into uh, your whole central nervous system, and you can really come up with what appear to be epiphanies, but they're not epiphanies. They're actually based on your deep knowledge of the topic. So when I start to develop an intuition based on all this work of acquiring more knowledge and becoming so passionate about an area, I lose that fear. I'm not that I'm still don't have a modicum of it, but I'm not terrified anymore because I realize that I know this better than anyone. And if I'm going through the process of actually, testing my ideas, showing them to people, getting real feedback, I can't go too wrong. And also being, measured, and I'm not going to produce a million of them. If I do get to the point where I believe customers are clamoring to purchase it and I produce it, I'm never going to go too crazy with it. I'm going to test it and hone it along the way. And I've realized that for me has been the antidote. I mean, we'll always have fear. Fight or flight is part of our physiology, but it definitely helps a lot. So knowledge is an antidote to the intense fear.
We have someone who wrote in, what if the bite I received is quote unquote poisonous and I feel like I'm being misdirected?
Yeah. So the bites are often, I mean, when you get the bite, all it's telling you is to like follow your curiosity and learn more about it. So information is, again, I'm going to say that again, knowledge is power, right? Information, if we have the self-awareness to actually like look at it honestly, it guides us to everything. So you get the bite, you start to engage in learning more, dive into it, like start to go through it. And what's supposed to happen is the more you learn, the more interested you become, right? It builds. I mean, in my few areas of passion in my life, oh my gosh, like the more I learn, the more I'm like, oh, this is incredible. And I start to shake and I get so excited. Like it grows. So if you're aware, if it's not growing and you're starting to feel like heavy and like this is awful, like this is poisoning me, then guess what? Again, follow your curiosity again, get rid of it, cross it off the list, and follow it somewhere else. And I mean, that's the point, and it could take us into our 50s, 60s, 70s to find that thing, especially if we've been on a very extrinsic societal path of doing what, we think is right and pursuing extrinsic things. We may have no idea what our crystallizing experience should be. And we might add, I've talked to many people in their 50s, 60s, 70s who I'm saying, go out there and be like a child, like engage in a lot of trial and error. And it might take you a few years to find it. But the more you explore, the more you have a chance of finding it.
So when you talked about intuition, Melissa, and you described, you do all of this research and learning, and knowledge is power, and you have all these ingredients inside, and then that creates the elements, if you will, for your intuition to work with. I want to understand more how your intuition works with all of those elements, because you come up with stuff that other people aren't coming up with when they're ingesting maybe a lot of the same data points. And I bring this forward because you've invented 10,000 toys while you were the chief creative officer at Melissa and Doug. I mean, it's almost inconceivable to think of that many toys. So something's happening inside of you that's this alchemy of intuition that I think we can learn from.
Yeah, but I will also say that my odds of success are very low. And one of the most fascinating things I've learned in my life, there's this incredible researcher, Dean Simonton. He's like a creativity genius researcher. And he talked a lot about creativity, and that there's a quantity equals quality, which you would never think about. This idea that you have to produce more to have more success. And, someone once calculated the percentage of products at Melissa and Doug that were successful. And they calculated this Harvard McKinsey consultant, and he calculated that I was only successful around 35% of the time, which I found so amazing, because it meant that 65% of the time I failed, right? And I loved that, because it showed, and it showed that I had to fail more to succeed more. And it really was a good lesson for the perfectionist that, I can never know ahead of time what is going to work and what isn't. So I have to take my best guess, create incessantly more and more and more, and know that the more I create, the more successes I'll have. So, yes, I think my creativity is impelled by an inner unsettledness that is incredibly acute. And so it is motivated by a need to channel this internal chaos into concrete form. So it has become my meaning and my being to do that. So it is a bit innate, but it doesn't mean that we all can't get to that point where we can learn to channel whatever we have in us into something really creative.
With each of the new ideas, did you have a moment inside that it felt a certain way, like a tingle inside or something, where you go, this is a good one? What's that like for you?
It does. I mean, I'll get emotional if I talk about it, but I call it the boundless expanse of white space. And the only thing I can think it must be like is heaven. And it's this brilliant white light. And when I'm in that space, like, time stops. It's pure flow state. And then the epiphany, you could call it, I used to call it the angels are singing, because I would literally hear like and it would be like this idea would rise up from unconsciousness to consciousness. And I'd almost like pluck it out and be like, wow, this might be a winner. But again, 2/3 of the time it wasn't a winner. So the coolest thing about intuition is just an adjective that describes the way we create ideas. It has no bearing on the caliber of the idea. So it's just a guide, and intuition can be wrong. In fact, scientists used to say that their intuition was wrong more than it was right. But it's the best guidance we have. So, sometimes I have lots of intuitions that are wrong, but I know it's my best guess at the moment. And then what do? I learn more information, right? I'm big on this information gathering, starting from the blank canvas, not knowing, starting from like, what is this information telling me? And then taking the new ingredients, recombining them again and seeing if I can come out with something, that maybe is an enhanced version of the thing that didn't do well.
I think this is really important because I think sometimes when people have that experience, the angels are singing, and then it doesn't work out. They decide that the angels betrayed them, and
Exactly.
screw the angels. This stuff doesn't work.
Yes. So the other super cool experience I had, because I created toys for 32 years. And what I used to do is take all my favorite failures and put them behind me on what I originally had is a little shelf of like forgotten toys, but it became my entire space. At one point I had close to 800 forgotten toys on my shelf. And what I saw was the most incredible thing ever, because what I saw was it's not as black and white as success or failure. Because what sometimes happened, this is the craziest thing, is a product that failed in 1 decade, 10 years later, I would bring back exactly as it was, not a single change, and it would become a resounding success. So it was a timing issue. Another time, it was simply like a packaging issue. Maybe the packaging just masked what it was. It was a mystery in a box, and I needed to enhance, the packaging. So I began to see that it really wasn't that these things failed. It was just there was some little thing in the creation of them that I needed to change. And if I could look at them honestly and really try to understand why they didn't work, I could fix that thing, maybe not right away if the timing wasn't right, but 10 years later, and create a bestseller out of the exact same idea. So I really started to see that we have to keep trying. We can't take that one example and use it. And if you believe Dean Simonton, who did studies, he studied all the greats, he found that even in the time of like Bach and Beethoven and Mozart, they were all qualitatively the same as hundreds of other musicians who you've never heard of. But the ones that became prolific simply created more. They created thousands of works, even though only a handful of them are considered masterpieces, whereas their peers created maybe 3 or 4. So it's really the odds of creating a masterpiece are much greater if you keep trying and creating more things.